history and contributions of Chinese in the United States. And by fostering understanding and a greater recognition of our experiences here in this country, we hope to inspire and connect all Americans. I would really like to thank the people that made today possible. So I would really like to thank the Serica Initiative. I heard someone from the Serica Initiative is there. Yeah. Thank you to the Serica Initiative for introducing us to the U.S.-China Education Trust, especially to Ryan, who coordinated most of this today. And I just really want to say what an honor it is to have Gish Jen here. First off, she is a supporter of our journey wall there. We have her parents' tile up there, Norman and Agnes Jen. So we're proud that it still stands here today and she can honor her family like that. But also, I just want to say quickly, when I was a freshman at the University of Pennsylvania, my first class at the University of Pennsylvania was Asian American Literature. It was my first Asian American Studies class. And in that class, we got to read Mona and the Promised Land. And it was refreshing because the first books that we read were Woman Warrior and Joy Luck Club. And Mona and the Promised Land really stood out to me. One, because it was a comedy. Two, because the protagonist was actually a teenager. And so at 18, I was a lot closer to that age than I was, the characters of Woman Warrior, Joy Luck Club. And third was the teenager, Mona Chang. She grew up in a prosperous family in Scars Hill, New York, where there was a lot of Jewish people. And me growing up in Brooklyn and going to a lot of bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs myself, I really, really related to it. So it was really the first Asian American novel that I saw myself in. And I could relate to at my age and, kind of my lifestyle rather than I loved Women Warrior and Joy Love Club, but it was just completely different kinds of dynamics. So thank you for writing that. Um, Fast forward to my 20s, I love Asian American studies, and I end up dedicating myself to the Asian American nonprofit community. I'm fortunate enough, my first real job out of college was working at a nonprofit called the Committee of 100, which was a membership organization, a very prominent Chinese Americans who are dedicated to improving U.S.-China relations and working on Chinese American issues. And at the top of that membership list, because her name ends with a B or starts with a B, her last name, was Ambassador Julia Chang Block. And I got to read her bio almost, every time we put together a book club. She was born in Yantai, China. Her father was the first Chinese graduate of Harvard Law School, amazingly. And she attended herself Lowell High School in San Francisco, which my nephews have attended, the University of Berkeley University, Harvard University for graduate school, and had an illustrious career where she was appointed by George H.W. Bush to become the first Asian American ambassador to represent the United States as the ambassador of Nepal. Later, she was the executive vice president of Bank of America, and later she founded a nonprofit, which are here today, called the U.S.-China Education Trust. And so to tell you a little bit more about the trust, and to introduce our speakers today, it's my pleasure to introduce Ambassador Julia Chang Block.
Well, Michael has gotten us off and running. Thank you, Michael. When you become as old as me, you need more notes. Anyway, good evening, everybody. And really thank you, Michael, for allowing us to use your beautiful museum. And we're really honored. Well, let me add my welcome to the launch of our New York program. First time. And we are delighted to have this incredible Gish Jen. And why? Do you know that Gish launched the Asian American Author Series for the U.S.-China Education Trust in 2012? She was our first author. And she set the standard for what this program has become. And what is it? A platform to amplify Asian American voices, challenge stereotypes, and bridge cultures through storytelling. And in 1922, Gish joined us to celebrate the series' 10th anniversary. And having Gish back tonight brings us full circle and reminds us how far both Asian American literature and this program have become. Now, Chen Julie Wang, who is our moderator tonight, I asked her when I met her for the first time right here. I said, "Why is your name Julie in the middle of your last name? Two last names, right?"
No, Chen is my Chinese.
Chinese first name. Ah, okay. I couldn't figure it out. And she said it was because she said at one time she wanted to get rid of her Chinese name. Then later she decided she wanted it back. So that's how she got her name. But what Julie, I call her Julie. I think it's similar. What she is a lawyer. So then I asked her, her husband is also a lawyer. My husband is also a lawyer. I asked her, I said, what is a lawyer doing writing books? You can tell us. I mean, you didn't tell me yet, right? But I know lawyers. I come from Washington, D.C. And lawyers that I know do not and cannot write books. Or cannot write books that you will want to read. So, but anyway, this is in short, welcome. And she has a 2-year-old. So that keeps her busy. We're going to try and do a program with her in Washington, D.C. So when USCET began the series, Back to Work, more than a decade ago, our goal was a simple but important one: to raise the voices of Asian American authors and share their work with audiences on both sides of the Pacific. In the years since, Asian American writers have redefined the American literary landscape, winning Pulitzers. We're waiting, I guess. National Book Awards, and expanding the American story itself. Yet, even among this remarkable group, Gish stands apart. Why? Well, because with her trademark humor and humanity, she has shown us that the immigrant experience is not a side story. It is the American story. Gish has explored every genre: 6 novels, 2 nonfiction books, and 2 short story collections. Did I miss anything?
No, that's all.
That's quite enough. Continually posing the question, who gets to be called American? Ask yourselves that question. Who gets to be called American? In these days, very few. We are thrilled to honor her newest novel, Bad Bad Girl, released by Novel just last month. Just last month, right here. This may be her boldest work yet, tracing a mother-daughter relationship defined by love, loss, and defiance. It's a story that is both deeply, deeply personal. I learned things I hadn't known for a long time, and profoundly universal. That's Gish. Despite many years of knowing Gish, Bad Bad Girl, until this story, I never realized how much we have in common. Like Gish, I come also from a wealthy Shanghai family of bankers. Like Gish's grandmother, my maternal grandmother was also a Suzhou beauty. Unfortunately, I didn't take after her. Yeah, very honest. Right. But it looks and we're doing the hell, right? And our families emigrated to the United States to make a new life here. It's fitting that we are here in the Museum of Chinese in America. When I read, I have to say, I read it quite quickly. Bad, Bad Girl. I saw not just Gish's story, but echoes of my own, and the story of so many Chinese Americans, of mothers and daughters, fathers and sons, of duty and defiance, of what it means to find freedom without forgetting where you came from. Gish, welcome back home to USCET. You're opening New York for us. Your stories remind us that identity is not a choice between worlds. It's the art of living fully in both. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our guest of honor. Third time around. Brilliant, fearless, and gloriously bad in the best sense of the word. Gish Jen.
I'm so happy to be here with you all today to honor the wonderful Gish Jen, a woman who needs no introduction, but I'm going to give a third introduction. I will keep it very short. I just have a very brief story. When I wrote my first book, I was a commercial litigator. I was brand new to publishing. I didn't know anybody. I just knew that I loved books. I also studied your book, Mona, in college. And I, as an Asian American woman who has since converted to Judaism, saw so much of myself in your book, and it meant so much to see that early. So I sold my book towards the beginning of the pandemic, June 2020. And I'm speaking to my team at Doubleday, and they say, "Do you know any authors who can blurb or endorse your book so we can start marketing?" And I say, "Do you know commercial litigators?" No. So all we do is talk to other commercial litigators and argue with other commercial litigators, and yeah, all I know are asshole lawyers. I do not know. And they said, "Okay, we're desperate then." And they cast about, my agents, my editor, everybody cast about, and I was like, it's the pandemic. Nobody knows who I am, and everyone is losing loved ones, and I don't expect to hear back from anybody. And I think it's a mere few weeks before we hear that I have received an endorsement, and I think it must be some debut novelist or someone who's young, and I am floored when the generous, kind words come from none other than Gish Jen. Thank you so much for starting my career. And now I have learned that it was just months after you lost your mother as well. And I can't imagine the dedication and care that you have passed forward to me. Thank you. And I think it really speaks to her humility that just a few months ago when she asked me to do this event, she opened her email with, "I don't know if you remember me." So of course I remember you. So I'm just delighted to be here, delighted to be in conversation with you. I think we're gonna open with a reading from Gish, and then we'll speak a little bit, and then I'll turn the questions to you. So start thinking about what you might want to ask.
Thank you, Julie. I loved your book. So it was really easy to do. And I feel it's a great privilege actually to be in a position now where younger minds will come to me. And it's a great position to be able to help, honestly. And I know the Serica Initiative, a lot of you guys are all about getting these stories out. And it's just, I'm just doing my job. But it's really easy when it comes in like Share Julie's. I will say also that, it's just wonderful to be here and to be part of the USCET project again and to be in this beautiful space. And I feel like it's, I am in the middle of a book tour. This is probably my, I don't know, 12th, 13th, 14th event, something like that I'm doing. But this is the only one where honestly I feel like I want to cry already. Julia made me want to cry. Julia made me cry to cry. Being here makes me want to cry. And there's something about this space also, I feel like this is what it is, that we can come here, we really feel we are ourselves. People get us, we get each other, and we can all cry. Although not only cry. So I'm here to talk about my book. It is called Bad Bad Girl. I am the Bad Bad Girl in the title. But there's another Bad Bad Girl in this book, of course, and that's my mother. My mother, like Julia's, was from Shanghai, grew up in the 1930s, from this very wealthy banking background. I think it's fair to say that she would just as soon stay there. I mean, these guys were having a great time, right? But thanks to history, she ended up in New York. She had 5 children. I was the second. I think it's fair to say that I was not the daughter of her dreams. And so this book is very much about that. But it's also an attempt to see her, as a fully as a person of her of her in her own right. See her in the round, see her as a person with her own struggles. I think that this is a journey. When people keep on saying how universal my book is, I think it's a journey that a lot of us have to make. Where first you're a child and you experience your parents as parents. You only experience them relative to yourself. And then you get to a certain age where finally you can see them as people, and that people who existed before you existed, and it have done a lot. And also I will say too, this is a book that I would not have written, had my mother not died of COVID. But I think that I was not ready to write either until I reached a certain age, where I could really, now that I'm a mother myself and I understand how complicated it is to be a parent. And so it's something where it's a book where I do try to get at some of the complexity of that parent-child relationship. And also, I will say to do homage to all parents, but especially to immigrant parents who've done so much to establish their families here in America. So, very complicated book, but I'll just read a little bit. I think we decided I'd go with the short, not the very shortest possible reading, but a shorter reading so that we can talk. Uh, so this book did start during COVID after my mother died. And what happened was that my mother died, and then, some time passed, and I was sitting down to my computer every day because that's what I do. I'm a writer. I don't know what else to do in the morning. But I found that I couldn't work supplies. And I started writing to my mother. And then my mother, being my mother, started writing back. And so this book, a lot of it is a more conventional narrative, but there are a lot of sections in it in which I am speaking to my mother and she is speaking back. So I'm talking to the dead. And then if you were looking at this on the page, you would see that those sections are in bold and in italics. My mother had died, but still I heard her voice. Your grandmother was a Suzhou beauty, she says. Do you know where is Suzhou? Of course, I say, west of Shanghai. For I do know. Suzhou is where the classic Chinese gardens are. The humble administrator's garden, the lingering garden, the garden of the master, the visionaires. West of Shanghai is the correct answer. But my mother does not say so. She's the same now as she was when she was alive, a master of the art of withholding. Your grandmother was Suzhou beauty, my mother says again. She spoke Suzhou dialect. Chinese people say it is like singing. And she was tall and thin, by the standards of 1920 Shanghai, that is, meaning tall but thin but maybe not so tall, I think. As was my mother in her youth, too, although I mostly picture her in her late life big-bellied stage, when she had the bulbous shape of a snake that has swallowed a large animal. Her stomach was so perfectly spherical that had she not been in her 90s, you might have thought her pregnant. And indeed, it was likely the result of her 5 children, the second of whom was me. But whatever. Go on, I say. All my life, after all, I have wanted to know how our relationship went wrong, how I became her nemesis, her bête noire, her lightning rod, a scapegoat. You look like her, she says. Only not so tall, not so thin, not so beautiful. Now, this is the mother I remember, tactful as a sledgehammer. When I see you, I see her, she says. Oh no, your mother? I say. because all the possible misfortunes at birth to remind your mother of a mother who rejected her is surely one of the worst, as well as it seems a great unmentionable. For what does she immediately say about that girl, you don't know how to talk? Well, she wasn't exactly the mother of your heart, was she, I say? That was your nursemaid, the one you called Naima, a milk mother, right? The one who was sent away. She neither agrees nor disagrees, but then she repeats Naima, and dead as she is, she begins to cry. How's that?
You know, towards the end of your book, you say that you're worried this book isn't funny, but I find it quite hilarious in many parts. And you're a rare author who can write serious and hilarious right next to each other, and one who can do fiction and nonfiction. And I understand that you started this book out as a memoir, and it has since become the book that it is. Can you speak a little bit about that journey and why you decided to blend genres?
Yeah, so what happened is that, I started writing to my mother, and then she started writing back. And then I realized that, there's so much about my mother I didn't understand, you know? And I wanted to write it all down. I wanted to write her whole story. She refused to write anything down while she was alive, and that was very frustrating to me too. And I will say that I wanted to write a memoir, probably just for myself, but also for my children who had not had a good relationship with her. Um, I started to write it down, and I started with, with one of the, most terrible events of her own life. And that was when she lost her nanny, Naima, when she was 7. And the nanny was just abruptly fired with no warning. And my mother was very, very close to that nursemaid. It was really her mother. And when she told that story, when I told that story, kind of just straight to my kids, they said, "Oh, that's too bad," they're kids, right? Say, "Oh, that's too bad." And then I thought, this is like the most important thing of my mother's life. And they don't seem to get that. And so I thought, let me try it as fiction, so then I drew in a nursemaid. I drew in, we actually don't know anything about this nursemaid, right? So every line is made up. We don't know anything about her. But I drew in a nursemaid. I drew in a rambunctious young girl. So I imagined my mother might have been. I drew in my grandmother, this is Joe Beauty. I drew in a lot, I drew it all in. And this time when they read it, when the nanny is fired, they were devastated. And so I thought, oh, I see. My way into the story, to the real story, which is the story of how she, of who she was and what this meant to her, is through fiction. There isn't enough fact, So, you know, um, my fellow novelist Tim O'Brien once said, we have fiction to tell the truth when the truth isn't enough. And I think that's right. So it is the truth of her life. This loss was the truth of her life, but I didn't have the facts to tell the truth about her.
And I'm so curious because when you enter this book, memoir, both memoir and fiction, you refer to yourself as a newborn, I think for a time in the book, as she in third person. And then slowly you become I. I'm so curious as an author why that choice was made.
Well, because it kind of shades from my mother's point of view to another point of view. And I will say that this book is I think if I hadn't written so much theory about individualism and collectivism and so on, I probably would not have had the nerve to do some of the things that I do in this book. But having written the theory myself, then I thought, well, I understand why it is that I moved to do this, and I'm going to go ahead and do it, and then they can write more theory about it. But there's a lot of shifting like that, and so as you point out, not only do I blend fiction and nonfiction in this book, but it's on a gradient, so it goes from highly fictional to almost completely non-fictional. And and as a writer, I have to say that was a very tricky thing to be managing. So that when you get to this last section, it's there's no jolt. Um, But I'm sort of managing it all the way. Anyway, so I have other funny things go on in my book.
It's astounding. I mean, it feels like when you read the beginning, it feels like you're in myth. And as you traverse the landscape of this book towards the end, you're like, oh, now I'm in memoir. And you've taken us so ably that I didn't even notice. And it's just a testament to your artistry, really. And speaking of theory, you speak a lot about how your mom had you 4 siblings, you're one of 5, and your mom always played favorites, and you were the least favorite, and you were the scapegoat, the only one she hit. Really searing passages where I, just cried along with you as a child. And then, but she called you bad girl because she was called that, but she also said you were the most Chinese of all of her kids. Do you have a theory as to why you were treated the way you were by her?
It's a complicated thing. It's a complicated thing. So, I would not want to reduce this very complicated relationship to this one answer or these two answers. So part of it, honestly, is that I was kind of her rejected self. That's one way of looking at it. That she herself, she'd been a bad girl. Her mother had not loved her. She was seen as way too smart and to be fair, in 1930s China, to be a smart girl was a complicated thing. And the parents, her parents, are looking at her and thinking, "Who is going to marry you?" They had reason to wonder. Of course, China at that time is modernizing, so they still, like many of us, many parents, they have all their experiences based on their generation, and it's hard to know what the rules are in the new generation. It's hard to know whether what you learned it applies anymore, especially when society is changing that fast. So, when they're saying, no one will ever marry you, they could have been wrong. But then again, they could have been right. I mean, nobody knows, and they certainly didn't know, and her mother certainly didn't know. But anyway, so my mother grew up with all these messages, which is it's bad to be a girl, it's too bad you're not a boy, because my mother was really smart, and she came to America to escape those things, but she had internalized them, and so in many ways, she wanted to be that person, but at the same time, she wished, I think, probably some level that she wasn't that person. So she would have loved to have been the daughter that everybody wanted her to be. And so there I am, and I am just like her. And so I'm kind of the something she herself was so ambivalent about. So that's one level. Another level is, and you see this a lot, not just in Chinese families, but a lot of families that are sort of less indoctrinated as we are now, new parenting ideas, you definitely don't want to triangulate, blah, 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 blah. We have all kinds of things that we know not to do as parents. But another problem was that, I was my father's favorite. Just as she had been her father's favorite. There's a lot of family patterns that they're getting repeated here. So she had been her father's favorite, and I was now my father's favorite. And I will say that, my father, it's funny, with my mother, I could do no right. With my father, I could do no wrong. And I think my mother resented it, that if I said, you know, we ought to do this, my father would listen to me before he would listen to her. And, that was pretty hard. So a psychoanalyst listening to my story, she immediately said, it's the Snow White victory story. So the reason, Snow White, the fairy goes, the woman goes, the queen looks in the mirror and says, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? And when Mirror says Snow White, the queen freaks out. And at some level, the fact that my father placed, esteemed me so much, was hard for my mother. So that was 2 reasons. Yet another reason, I mean, I could go on all night with just this one example. Another reason is that, I was the most Americanized of the kids. So for whatever reason, the minute I stepped into a kindergarten, the teachers loved me. I mean, I was just because the very qualities that would have made me so unmarriageable in China were all the things that they wanted in America. They wanted you to talk, they wanted you to be smart, they wanted you to be rambunctious, and they loved everything about me. And my parents, of course, they had come here. They decided to just come here, but I don't think they were really prepared for the whole program, especially in Scarsdale, New York, which is a very, very liberal place, My parents had moved there because they thought it was like one of the best school systems in the country. But I don't think they really realized that it was a kickyville over there. It's like, it's a very great school system, but it's very, very liberal. And, so nobody wore shoes and, we barely sat at desks, and no one was going to school. And I don't think that was really what my parents had signed up for, but all of that stuff was a complete natural fit for me. So a lot of it is simply, parents, all the parents that were dealing with these kids in the 60s, and then they're like poor Chinese immigrant parents, and they have, this really kind of rather Jewish, hippie, radical daughter. And I'm just, like I say, I'm a great fit for all things American, unfortunately. So that's just 3 levels, and we'll go on to another question now.
So you were both the most Chinese and the most Americanized of the Jen kids, and you were simultaneously your mother's least favorite and your father's most favorite. Where did that leave your sense of self? Because I was startled as I followed along in this book how once you found writing, I mean, you did go to business school and it was all.
I was also pre-med and pre-law.
Yeah, all Chinese American kids have to do those kind of things. But to really commit to being an author as a Chinese American kid is not easy, and it seems that once you found your talent, you just committed. And having received such confused messaging, I'm wondering how you got to that place and how you found yourself.
First of all, as I just saw my longtime editor, same editor at Knopf for 35 years, and I just saw her. She reminded me that at the end of every book, I always say that I'm done and I'm not going to write anymore. So I don't know that I seem so steady, at least to them, even though, and I have to say that probably one of the reasons that I could stick with it is that I received so much approbation. I mean, I really, I was just very, very, very lucky that way. John Updike's letters have just been published, and I am mentioned in them because he was chairman of the chair of the committee that gave me my Strauss Living. That's an award given out by the American Academy of Arts and Letters. It's $250,000. When I got the letter, I thought certainly that was a typo. But, and then it was given to me, and anyway, so, and Updike, he went on to have his picture taken when, at the turn of the millennium. I'm just thinking about this because I just talked to the BBC actually this morning about Updike, and they were asking me all about it. And, at the turn of the millennium, when, so this UK publication decided that they were going to do a special on figures who had been preeminent in their fields and their successors for the 21st century, John Updike picked me. So I've had a lot of support, I mean, I have more stories like that, I've always felt, because in myself, I don't, this maybe sounds a bit, myself, I don't feel like, I could never have imagined that I was even going to go on and become a real writer, much less that I was going to receive that kind of approval. And, this morning on the BBC, they're talking to me so respectfully. I sort of still can't believe it, really, honestly. I mean, I have an answer for them, and I can see that, I do have an answer for all their questions, and, I can speak in full sentences. But it still seems a little bit unreal to me, in truth,
Well, speaking from outside of you, I say that it's not just luck, and we're very lucky that you continue to keep writing. And we're 10 books in now. Mm-hmm. You said that this is your hardest book to write by far. How did you push through, and what? Well, I can imagine what were some of the hard parts about it, but talk to us about how such a seasoned, veteran writer could still have overcome so much trouble and difficulty in writing this book.
Yeah, so this is my most difficult. I mean, every book is difficult in its own way, partly because I'm so restless, so I don't do the same thing twice. As I was sort of discussing, just technically, this book was complicated, and the decision to fictionalize and what that meant, it was complicated. But of course, emotionally, it was even more complicated. And when I write at the end of the book, you can sort of see me thinking that, like, wow, I might actually write a book about this, and thinking I really couldn't do it. When I was thinking about there was not so much technical as emotional, because I do write about some very personal and very difficult things that honestly I would just assume have forgotten, and and but there they were, and I worried because when you write a book like this, if you're going to actually write a book and you're going to publish it, it's not therapy. In therapy, you say what happened to you, and you cry and you fall apart. And your therapist gives you gives you a Kleenex, right? This well, this is not that, and can't be that. It's much more like, you have to be able to really go back to the experience and really experience it, but you must also be above it at the same time. So it's a little bit like you're in a movie and you're both the actor and the director at the same time. So you have to maintain both of those realities. And if the material is difficult enough, that's tough to do. So I was, but it is in a way, kind of personally, it was almost like, so who am I today? Am I still Gish Jen, that little girl? Or am I Gish Jen, the novelist? Do you know what I mean? And of course, the answer is both. But anyway, to be able to keep those things in tension and to kind of get to the end of the passage, was hard for me, although I did do it.
Definitely did. And through the book, there's this very acute sense that you're writing to both remember and honor your mother's life, but also understand. Having now published it, do you, and I imagine you're speaking a lot about this book, do you feel that you understand her more?
Yeah, I mean, I have, I think, an appropriate amount of humility about this. I understand her as much as a person can understand someone else, and especially somebody else who's no longer living. Ian McEwan just wrote a book called What We Can Know, and it's all about these scholars are doing their research, and it turns out that they are 10,000% wrong. And I read the book and I thought, this book is like written to me. I have made my best guess, and I've gotten to a point where I think I understand her. But it's quite possible that I've gotten her completely wrong. That said, it is my best guess, and I do know her very well. And I also, things came out after her death that made me understand a lot more. I mean, her teaching log. She was a teacher in the Bronx and in a very rough school. And she had to keep a log of all the misbehavior in the class, really, so they could discipline these kids, And so there it all is, like exactly what it really was like to be a teacher in one of these classes where these kids are just beating the crap out of each other. And, I did find that log, among her, in her stuff after she died. And, that was a whole window onto my mother. I mean, I had so much respect for her that she was doing this job day after day. I mean, it was tough. The log is in there. It's verbatim. I mean, that is her log. And she was doing it to pay tuition, for my college. I mean, you've got to take your hat off. And she might have been mean to me, but, she would always sound very Confucian. If she saw herself as having a duty, her duty was to send her kids to school, and she was going to do it. Even for her least favorite job, but that was their job, and she did do things that really, I don't mean to generalize, but I would say that the average parent of my American my European American friends, I don't think they would do it. I think that this is the kind of thing that you see, a Chinese person will do, especially for education. So so stuff like that. So I understood her better because these papers, also the family letters came out after she died, and I knew that she had not had a good relationship with her mother, but I didn't realize how bad it was. And but once we had the letters, I was like, oh my God, look at this, and that was a whole other layer, of her that came into view.
Yeah, the entries plus the calendar notes were very moving. I can only imagine how you felt seeing Gish Jen's mom had written these notes about buying you a specific toy that you were terrified of when you were a kid and saving up for that, and your pregnancy losses. I've experienced the same. So when I saw that, and the fact that your mother took care to know those dates, it just it touched a deep part of me, and I can only imagine, after her death, the waves of conflicting emotion. And you write about how you wish that your relationship would have been different when she was living, that you could have been the type to read together because you so shared a love of words and books, and towards the end of her days, how you wish that she would have apologized and said, I'm sorry for some of the things. And I think throughout the book, the passages in bold of conversing back and forth with her, I know that there's still a lot of disapproval in her voice. Do you think that and you said you couldn't have written this if she stayed living, but do you think that if she had read this while alive, she would give you some approval or some acknowledgement of apology? Where do you think she would land now?
You know, I wish, that something I wrote could make her change. But I actually, but in my heart of hearts, I don't think she would have softened. Yeah, because, and a lot of that is this kind of, this kind of pride and this interest in base, I think she had too much pride, if nothing else, just to apologize to her daughter. And I think she would have liked it that I actually realized all the things that she did, and then she got credit for it. I think that she would have liked that, but and she definitely would not have liked having a book written about her. And even if I could say to her, Mom, you know, there she is with all her warmth. And I have to say that at least when people come out of this book and they don't like her, they haven't told me. Because every single person I have talked to has come out of this book really admiring and even loving my mother. And so, and I would have liked to tell her that, Mom, you don't have to have like we we don't have like have to this sanitized, whitewashed version of you in order for people to love you. People would love you warts and all, so you don't have to maintain this facade. People would love you as you are with all your faults. You as written by your least favorite child, and people, but people will still love you. And I don't think that she had that kind of faith because I think that she didn't grow up with that kind of love. I don't think, to her, of course, love was conditional. And of course, and then when I look at it, she was a pretty wonderful kid, and I can't really understand how her mother could not have loved her. Although, I wasn't so bad either, and my mother did love me, so, it's complicated.
I think that is the sense that readers come out of this with. It's one thing to love a character wrought through rose-colored lenses, quite another to behold a person as she is, and to sit here and be like, she still would not like this book, but love her anyway. And your defiant love in that sense, I think, carries through to the rest of us perceiving her through your lens. I have one last question. I'm going to turn it over to you, so start thinking about your questions. But I think that a big part of this book is about two firstborn daughters. And you had me realize so much of what I had carried in my childhood as a firstborn daughter. I mean, part of why I eschewed my Chinese name for so long, Qian, which is actually the character in Qianlong, the famous emperor, I realized that it was picked for a boy. And I realized that my first act of living was to disappoint my parents, and how that has played out in pretty much every day of our relationship. And seeing you reflect this way has opened. I think if I had read this book before I wrote my memoir, it would be a different book. But you towards the end you close with these beautiful words from your daughter, very wise, and she says the effects of trauma can't be washed away in a generation. It takes many generations, with every echo growing fainter. And I want to ask you now that you've been a mom for quite some time to a firstborn daughter as well as a son, how, for better or for worse, your relationship with your mother and what you have inherited shows up in your relationship with your child and how you see it going forward.
So I'll say first of all, my daughter who's a lawyer, or going to be a lawyer, third year. Um, those were not her words. Those were actually the words of Nikki Mufuz, who was a Nobel laureate, Egyptian writer. I was very proud that she was reading Nikki Mufuz and actually knew what his book was about. But those are not her actual words, her own words. Um, I mean, first of all, I will say that for all of, and I've written all these books and done all these things, I actually feel that the biggest achievement of my life has been to stop this pattern and to have a good relationship with my daughter. And I do have a wonderful relationship with my daughter. So I'm very, very happy about that. That said, I do have things that come to me from my mother, not just from my mother, but from my father too, I will say. For, the privileging of education, of course, and the willingness, to go really, to any length for my children. I mean, it's like, I mean, I'm definitely not, I was definitely not the like, I can't give up this and I can't give up this and I can't give up that. I gave up everything for my kids, and I don't regret it. And I guess maybe, um, you know, there's a lot of messages from the mainstream in America, which is like, there's something, wrong with self-sacrifice. You know what I mean? Like you should be better to yourself and you treat yourself better. And I guess I could treat myself a little better than I do, but in a general kind of way, I think I inherited their idea that self-sacrifice is a very beautiful thing. That it meant that you believed in something, that you cared about other people, that you put other people first. I don't really think that it's so great to always put yourself first. Um, Not just because it sounds bad, like, I come first. Because I don't think it's a path to happiness. I think that it's much more fulfilling, to put other people first. And, and, yeah, so I think I got that from my parents. Absolutely.
It's beautiful that we don't exist in and of our own, but in relation to others.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my book, The Girl, the Baggage Claim.
Yeah.
Explaining the East-West gap, the East-West culture gap. Yes, it's very much about interdependence. It's sort of, look, individualism has its pluses for sure. And we see excesses both in individualism and in collectivism for sure. But there's a lot of wisdom, and I hate that word collectivism anyway, but there's a lot of wisdom in interdependence. And like I say, it it's not an answer in and of itself, but we we err when we go too much on the individualistic side.
All right. Well, with that, I will turn it over to the community answer.
Hi, Gish. I was just wondering if your sibling have,
Introduce yourself.
oh, hi, my name is Wang. I'm just curious if your siblings have read the book and what was their thoughts about your relationship to your mom? Like, were they surprised that you didn't, have the relationship with your mom and how that their perspective have changed?
Yeah, I have to say that I told my siblings that I would not say one word about them. Because it's bad enough that they share a mother with them. There's their mother has been dragged into public, and that's bad enough. But I said that I wouldn't say anything about them, and so you'll have to forgive me, but I'm not gonna say anything about it.
Hi, I'm Tommy out here on Facebook, right?
Oh my God! Hi.
And I'm a footnote in the girl in the lunch. So I haven't read Bad Bad Girl. But so there are a couple of things, and I don't want to take half an hour, but one, so I look, we only see the finished product, right? We only see what comes out in the stores. So, to me, it's the resistors, Mr. Nixon, Bad Bad Girl. So first thing and is, do you look back on the resistors and think, how did I know what that it's so unnervingly prescient. Um, and do you look back on that and say, did I see something other people didn't see, or so? And then the other thing is, because we only see the finished product, um, it looks to me that, I mean, all your work is deeply personal, all your work is deeply human. Um, but it looks like you're dealing with big issues, family and big issues and resistors, small people in a big world in Nixon. This seems more internal. Are you aware of that when you're working your way through it? So it's a couple of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I knew that I was working much more personally on in this book, you know, and that, parts of me are, look, the books come out of you, so obviously they're personal, I mean, you spend years on them, something of you will be reflected in it, but not like this, and so it was more internal. And, there's, that said, I've always, had both, my characters and an awareness of the larger world. I mean, I think that, a book for me that is quite internal still includes, in this case, all of 20th century Chinese history. Like there's like a lot of history, and so the context is always there. And whereas you will read books by I don't want to say who, but by some of my fellow authors, where honestly it's hard to tell that anything is going on in the world, and that's never true of my book. So even though this book is the most personal, it is nonetheless very firmly tethered to larger forces. And in fact, I would say that when I think about my mother, besides of course I wish that she would apologize, but quite even more than I wish that she would have apologized to me or whatever. I just so feel for her that she lived in a world where those first forces were so strong. I mean, the sexism was just terrible. I mean, just really beyond anyone's anything that anyone should have to tolerate. And and of course the history. I mean, everybody in this room knows this history. I don't need to tell you. I mean, it was just a terrible history to have to live through all that trauma. And, like, I look at my mother and I just think, wow, what would she have been if, I could have just airlifted her into a whole nother era, you know? I feel incredibly lucky myself, being kind of this transition generation. And then I look at my daughter like, oh my God, wow, And, but I look at my daughter and I think, wow, actually that could have been my mother, my mother could have done that. And that's a lot to think about, to see lives circumscribed like that by history, and, you know, world events, sadly.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Hi, Gish. I'm Ching with a Q as well. I'm very interested in what you were saying about motherhood, and you said you sacrifice everything for your children and sort of the Eastern and Western philosophies. I've sort of lived between two worlds as well, and I am also a mother of two young kids, and my philosophy has been like, I just need to keep myself sane first. When you put on the life vest, you got to save yourself first before the baby.
So my question is maybe a little personal, like what are these sacrifices, and especially how do you reconcile with that? Like being an artist, you have to be selfish. You have to go very deep into your work. Okay, you're right. I didn't actually sacrifice everything because I held on to my work. I held on, but I mean, this is kind of personal. But I mean, you know, I could go for a week without a shower. I'm very lucky that I'm not very smelly. But I mean, when you're at the point that you're so busy that you're not showering, it's you've given up a lot, And, I gave up sports that I liked, and I gave up, I'm actually a very active person, and I became, I was really in terrible shape by the time my kids were, 12 or so. That said, I'm in great shape today. I mean, it doesn't go on forever, But at that time, and most importantly, also, even though I did my work, but I didn't do all the auxiliary stuff, So I didn't do all the stuff. So it's kind of even now, I think people are a little like, oh my god, like Gish Jen actually came to this festival. I think they're so used to the idea that I don't come. But I didn't do all that stuff. And I always, and I always said, I will not put my kids on the altar of art, so that even though I did do my work, but the kids came first. And they know that, and I have to say that I don't regret it. Everybody, it's a decision everybody has to make, but I don't regret it, and I think maybe also realizing that that I didn't have good models of parenting. I realized that I had to put my kids first. Do you know what I mean? In other words, that I couldn't be on autopilot. The way that some people can because they're great models and also their mothers are helping. And they have a lot more room for themselves. I couldn't do that, and I didn't. For what it's worth. Yeah, maybe one more time. Okay, sure. What conscious decisions did you make in raising your daughter? Well, it's interesting. I think that one thing is that, we really avoided all evaluatory language. It was never evaluative. So, but it's funny because, my son was bad. We would call him a bad, bad boy, and so, but we never said my daughter was either a bad, bad girl or a good, good girl. We never said either one. And when she commented on later, she said, "Well, why, So we were a little looser with my son than we were with her, and we didn't, and we very, even though my mother hadn't pushed me, but I was, I really didn't want to push her in any way, and so my kids grew up really very wild." Very, very wild. So, today she was like, well, everybody else went to like gifted child, blah, 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 blah. And, how come I didn't go to gifted child camp and, no Suzuki violin, none of that. And we lived and grew up, both my kids are very wild. I'm like the anti-tiger mother. I was once on a panel with, I was actually at Amy Chua's house, it was a funny thing where I had given a talk at US China, and Yale China, whatever it was, and then they said, "Oh, would you stay? Reasonable money, come to dinner?" I said, "Of course, yeah." But they didn't tell me that the dinner was at Amy Chuan's house, and that I was going to have to discuss parenting with her on Amy Chuan's couch. And it was a very interesting. It's just there's lots of ways to skin the cat. Her kids have come out great too. But anyway, I remember listening to all the things that she did. It was like so impressive. I myself started thinking like, wow, like wow. And then their kids went to Harvard. Wow. And then they turned to me, and I was well, but actually, my kids also went to Harvard. And I didn't do any of that. I mean, I did zero of it, zero. But I think that maybe this is, it wasn't so much that I was doing the opposite of what my mother, because my mother didn't do very much that way either. But she did have ideas about what the kids are supposed to be doing. Do you know what I mean? And she did have in her mind rather set ideas. And we were at great pains, actually not just my daughter, but we had great pains not to burden either one of those of our children with those kinds of ideas. So in our view, they could do whatever they wanted. And actually it's worked out great.
Well, that's a wonderful note to end on. My name is Josie Levine. I'm the Executive Director of the U.S. China Education Trust, and I'm going to extend a few thanks and a few announcements as we close out. First, a huge thanks to you all for bringing a very cold night to be here, joining us for this discussion and asking great questions. A huge thanks to our partners at MOCA and Serica to make this event possible, and Ryan McElveen in the back from the USCET team who did a lot of the coordination for this. But last but very not least, a huge thanks to Chen Julie and to Gish for joining us. Thank you. It's very fitting that we have two generations of Asian American authors on stage. We're really excited to relaunch this series of ours that Julia mentioned at the top, the Asian American Author Series, where we try to feature a range of artists and creators of Asian American heritage, really with the idea that as Julia noted, these are American stories that need to be promoted now more than ever, but also that's a unique bridge between the United States and China. Chinese audiences read Asian American literature and understand America through that perspective, and vice versa. American, audiences who might not have any experience in China read these immigrant stories and have a greater sense of the humanity that represents the U.S.-China relationship. So we'll be holding these events quarterly, some in Washington, some online, hopefully more here in New York. And we hope if you're interested in hearing more about this program and following along with our upcoming work, get in touch and sign up for our mailing list. We have some flyers at the front, and you can add your name to our mailing list and social media. And we hope to see you online or in future events in the future. So thanks for joining us. Very last announcement. We're delighted that Gish will be signing books. We have books here for sale for those who want them. The folks at the front can help purchase if you want to make a purchase, and Gish will be here to do her signing. So thanks for joining me.